Iran could be a nuclear threat within about 72 hours if it simply wires the appropriate amount of purchase money to the central bank of North Korea in Pyongyang and get a couple warheads loaded on transports that would fly across China and deliver them to Iran.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. And this time we are talking to former National Security Advisor to Donald Trump and former US Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton. Ambassador Bolton, thank you so much for joining us on Frontline. And we are speaking as the world anxiously awaits Israel's response to the unprecedented missile and drone attack by Iran, launched from sites in Yemen and Syria as well. You believe Israel should act decisively, not proportionately. What do you mean by that?
Well, what happened on Saturday night was a classic act of war by Iran against Israel, an attack from the territory of Iran onto the territory of Israel. So cutting through all the use of terrorist proxies like Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Shia militia groups in Iraq and Syria as part of the Iranian Ring of Fire strategy. This was a direct Iranian attack. And I think that fully justifies an Israeli response. I think those who in the days and hours after the Saturday attack were saying things like President Biden take the win or just fundamentally wrong. It's not a win to remain alive. When particularly Israel worries about the existential threat of an Iranian nuclear weapons program, I think that should be a major factor in their decision to retaliate. At a minimum, what happened on Saturday was the failure of deterrence. And so the first question for Israel is how to restore deterrence. I don't believe you restore it with a group of medieval religious fanatics ruling a country like Iran by proportional response, tit for tat. It simply says to them, we know exactly what the response will be if we were to do it again. You reestablish deterrence by disproportionate force. Make it clear to the adversary that if they ever try anything like that again, they will suffer far more than any cost they impose on Israel, meaning if they're sensible, if they have any kind of logic comparable to ours, they won't risk it again. And that's what Israel should be aiming at.
And Iran has preempted Israel's response by threatening that even the tiniest invasion of its territory would bring a massive and harsh response, and that if Iran had wanted to carry out a bigger attack on Saturday, it would have done, and nothing would have remained of the Zionist regime. What do you think their intention was?
Well, I think that kind of rhetoric derives from Kim Jong-un's playbook in North Korea. He routinely announces he's going to unleash a sea of fire across the Korean peninsula if anybody looks at him cross-eyed. Um, this is from a regime that says it doesn't want nuclear weapons, that it's not pursuing them covertly, and yet it's using that kind of language. That's the language of a regime that, unfortunately, for all concerned, its people, Israel's people, the rest of the world, unfortunately, only respects force. The way to demonstrate that force is right at hand now with a very strong Israeli response. Is there risk in a strong Israeli response? Of course. But there's graver risk, I think, in not responding, given Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons.
But what do you think Iran's intention was?
Well, we know that this was an unprecedented effort by Iran to attack another country. They've never done anything quite like this before. They used cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones. So it was trying to show their overall capability. I don't think this was a kabuki theater exercise. I think they expected to inflict significant damage. And one fact that hasn't gotten much attention, which I think is important, reported by the Wall Street Journal on Saturday and by CBS reporting separately on Wednesday, informed by American sources that of the 120 ballistic missiles that Iran launched out of the total of 320 projectiles Saturday night, of the 120 ballistic missiles, half blew up on the launch pad or crashed to Earth before they got close enough to Israel to shoot down. Now, if that's correct, a failure rate of 50% of their ballistic missiles tells us something about their capabilities. you don't play act at going after Israel when you're going to be embarrassed by the fact that half your ballistic missiles were junk. So I think it demonstrates the seriousness of Iran's intention and the weakness of their ballistic missile arsenal.
The US and the UK are all about not escalating, but is the risk of a greater regional war a risk you simply have to take at this moment?
Israel's in a regional war. That's what the Ring of Fire strategy is. And obviously, decision makers have to calibrate risk against a reward here. What do they expect to get? What do they fear might happen later? There is a risk in retaliating. Nobody can deny that. There's also a risk in not retaliating, in saying to Iran that, in effect, Israel is intimidated by Iran or has succumbed to U.S. pressure. This goes to one of the most important and least well-known things Winston Churchill ever said when he talked about the confirmed unteachability of mankind, of our unwillingness to act when the cost of action is minimal, only to face the problem down the road where you have to act and the cost and the risks are much higher. I come back again to the Iranian nuclear weapons program. No one in Israel can have any faith that the next time they see incoming ballistic missiles from Iran, they may have nuclear warheads under their nose cones.
Iran was retaliating, it says, to the Israeli attack on the Iranian consulate building in Syria. Do you think that attack was justified?
Well, it took out several senior Quds Force officials who are the people responsible for Iraq and Syria who have been transporting Iranian drones and missiles across Iraq and Syria into Lebanon to go into Hezbollah's arsenal. They were directing part of the Ring of Fire strategy. That entitles Israel to go after them. They are combatants. It's true they were apparently in a consulate, but that doesn't shield them as they're carrying on military activity. You can go into a church or you can go into an office building and put a cross on the front door. That doesn't mean it's a religious facility. It's being used for military purposes.
Do I understand by that the answer is yes?
Absolutely, they were justified.
President Zelensky is extremely angry that Ukraine has not been defended against Russian drones with the kind of swift coordinated operation we saw for Israel. Is he right to be upset about this? And do the explanations for this stack up?
Zelensky is right, and the explanations being given as to why he didn't receive that assistance are very poor. I think the U.S. And the West as a whole has not given assistance to Ukraine in a comprehensive strategic fashion. We've dribbled it out over 2 years. Uh, at whatever levels we've given, Britain has been in the forefront. The U.S. has lagged behind. But let's just take one of the early questions that came up about air power for Ukraine. Poland asked if the U.S. would object if Poland sent its Russian-derived MiG fighter planes to Ukraine in the very early days of the war. Secretary of State Blinken said on one of our Sunday talk shows we would support that request, and he was overruled. There's only one person who can overrule it. And Ukraine, to this day, 2 years later, still does not have adequate air capability and obviously does not have defense. What are the Russians firing at? Civil power stations to harm Ukraine's economy and its civilian population. I could go through a long list of weapon systems that we've debated one after the other, agonizingly slowly, and then finally deliver them again in a piecemeal fashion. People say the war is gridlocked. Ukraine doesn't have a war to winning. At the moment, it is gridlocked. But one critical reason for that is the inadequate strategic thinking of the assistance we've given them.
The current crisis, you could argue, with Israel and Iran has injected energy into the stalled US aid package for Ukraine and Israel. We now know it will be voted on in the coming days. House Speaker Mike Johnson has said, we have to do the right thing and history will judge. What's changed?
Well, I think Speaker Johnson has risen to the occasion. I don't think he ever expected to be Speaker of the House when Kevin McCarthy was ousted 5 months or so ago. I think he's found his voice though, and he knows your listeners may not be aware his job is on the line. opponents of aid to Ukraine, who are many of them spouting Russian propaganda, literally, have threatened to oust him from the speakership. There's a very narrow Republican majority. It's a couple of votes. There are a number of vacancies. The aid package may succeed or fail on Saturday. We don't know. I think if it gets a open vote on the House floor, it will pass. But Speaker Johnson may face what's called a motion to vacate to oust him from the speakership. He's going ahead with it anyway. That is doing the right thing. We should support the Ukrainians. I hope that package passes, and I hope the speaker remains the speaker. He is demonstrating real courage against a group of people who are ill-informed at best and succumbing to Russian propaganda at worst. It's a real disgrace.
Every time the West has been considering bolstering support for Ukraine, President Putin finds a way of trying to scare the West off with a nuclear threat. Has Iran, do you think, been emboldened by this? And how soon before it poses itself a serious nuclear threat?
Well, I think Iran could be a nuclear threat within about 72 hours if it simply wires the appropriate amount of purchase money to the central bank of North Korea and Pyongyang and get a couple warheads loaded on transports that would fly across China and deliver them to Iran. Look, we're facing a new axis that's in the process of formation. It's not completely done yet, but the Beijing-Moscow axis is real. It's got its outliers like North Korea and Iran and Syria, Belarus, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. They're all on the same side. Iranian drones are being used by Russia in Ukraine right now. And I think the weakness the West has displayed, the ineffectiveness we've displayed in Ukraine, very visible in Moscow, very visible in Beijing, and in all the capitals that we fear. So we either get our act together again and face this challenge, or we're just going to see Ukraine and the war in the Middle East repeated elsewhere, in Asia in particular, where I'm now worried.
On that note, how do you think the forthcoming presidential election result in the US will determine future global security and, of course, that of NATO?
Well, I don't think either Joe Biden or Donald Trump are fit to be president. I think it's going to be a bad 4 years for the United States, whoever wins. But I would just say, with respect to Trump, I think he's very serious about getting out of NATO. I think that would be a catastrophic mistake for the United States. But those who say, oh, he's just bargaining with the Europeans, he's just trying to get their defense spending up to 2% of GDP, all I can say is from 17 months of personal experience, that's not what he's doing. I and probably thousands of other Americans over the years have pleaded with our friends in Europe to spend more on defense because we wanted to strengthen NATO. Trump criticizes those who don't make the target, not to strengthen NATO, but to give himself a ground to withdraw from it.
Just to return to where we started in this talk, we are at a point where Israel has not retaliated. We don't know exactly what it's going to do. What do you think is at stake here in terms of the way it reacts? How can this determine the future in terms of the stability of the Middle East and the way Iran will proceed?
The question is whether Israel wants to manage the problem of Iran or wants to try and solve the problem of Iran. I'd say it's sort of an American way of thinking that we don't manage problems, we solve them. The biggest threat to peace and security in the Middle East today is Iran, its nuclear program and its support for terrorism. Israel is the principal target. It's the little Satan that Iran talks about and whose nuclear program is, I think, devoted to destroying Israel. If Israel acts dispositively here, it will do itself and the world a favor. I don't know what the Israeli decision is, but I think the United States should support this, one of its strongest allies, as it acts against an existential threat posed by Iran.
Manage or solve?
Solve.
Ambassador Bolton, good to speak to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to support us, you can subscribe now or listen to Times Radio or go to thetimes.co.uk. My thanks to our producer, Morgan Burdick, and to you for watching. Bye for now.